All right, y'all, we are just days away from starting a brand new year, and preparations around the world, you better believe they're happening. In the United States, we know crews are getting ready for the ball drop in New York, and in North Texas, several communities are also planning their very own professional fireworks displays and celebrations. But we know ringing in the new year looks a lot different than it did when George Washington was president of the United States. So to help us take a look into the past, we now want to welcome SMU cultural historian Alexis McCrossen. She's got a brand new book coming out. It's called Time's Touchstone, The New Year in American Life. So Alexis, I want to thank you for being with us. And
well, thank you.
Of course. So listen, the first thing I'm very curious about is what made you interested to take a look back at New Year's traditions?
Well, I've always loved holidays, and I especially love the holidays that sort of seem to come up out of nowhere, right? Like New Year's. So it's a one day of the year. You don't actually have to do a whole lot to get ready for New Year's, other than maybe lay in a supply of champagne, or if you're going to be out in the streets, bundle up. And it's super fun, and then it's over.
I love that. And I'm a holiday girl, too. I'm the self-professed queen of Christmas. Mariah and I can duke it out. But New Year's is special. I feel like everyone has this, renewed sense of hope. And we see it with the fireworks and the celebration of the ball dropping in Times Square. But it wasn't always like that. And I know that's going to be hard for some people to imagine. So can you walk us through how people here in the U.S. started bringing in the new year, how they first did it?
Well, what I'll first say is that many people didn't bring in the new year at all. It was just another ordinary working day. If it fell Monday through Saturday, if it was Sunday, then people went to church. And there was maybe a New Year's sermon that would be given on the first Sunday of the new year. So in that sense, that people brought the new year in by acknowledging it in church. And another place that they acknowledged the new year would have been in their diaries. If they kept diaries, they might have had sort of written an account of the previous year, of what they were thankful for, of their great losses, of what they pledged themselves to do in the new year. And so in that, so we have those two things. But another thing that Americans did, but not very many of them, were the residents of Washington, D.C. had the opportunity to visit the president and the White House on New Year's Day for a huge open house or a reception, and they could shake the president's hand and have some punch and different kinds of snacks. One year, Thomas Jefferson had a mammoth cheese, a huge 1,000-pound hunk of cheddar cheese, and the guests were able to partake of the cheddar cheese. Men, women, children, anybody was welcome on that day. And New Year's was celebrated in that manner in Washington, D.C. until 1932. So between 1800 and 1932, New Year's Day, you're in D.C., go to the White House, shake the president's hand.
I feel like that's a really whimsical memory or recount of history, because to think about that now is a lot different, but to hear that they did that back then is really cool, honestly. And we know the White House is open in other occasions, but I have another question. The ball drop, it's become kind of the central piece of widespread New Year's celebrations. When did the first ball drop in New York? And do we know how that celebration even came to be what it is today?
What a great question. So in the late 19th century, cities began to electrically illuminate their streets, and they began to run electric streetcars and subways, and places began to open up at night because they could illuminate themselves. And so people began to go out a lot more. And so New Year's Eve, which nobody had celebrated except for mischief makers, and only a handful of them prior to the 1890s, was now in cities something that everybody went out for on New Year's Eve. And part of what they went out for was to gather around the prominent clocks and bells in the city, which would then ring in the new year at midnight. So you could gather around, say, Trinity Church's bells, or you could gather down at the City Hall in New York City or in other large cities as well. And the New York Times Company, when it opened its new building in what was at that time called Herald Square, they wanted to draw those New Year's Eve revelers to their building to sort of advertise themselves. It was a marketing event, essentially. And initially in 1905, which was when the building opened, they had fireworks on top of the building. But as you might imagine, fireworks on top of a building is a bad idea from a fire safety point of view. So they began to think about what to do, and they came up with the idea of a time ball, which was this huge illuminated orb that they put up, and we all know what it is, on top of a pole, and it had been used in daylight hours and ports in order to show the correct time so that people could set their watches and their timekeepers. Well, the Times company decided, let's illuminate the time ball and show the moment of midnight. And it was a kind of novelty. And December 31st, 1907 was the first ball drop. It heralded 1908, was a sensation, and they did it ever since, but for a couple of years during World War II.
That is absolutely fascinating. Who would have thought? I mean, it was a solution to a fire safety issue that's become the iconic symbol of New Year's. Alexis, I cannot thank you enough for educating us, expanding our minds about this. If you want to learn much more about all of this, you can keep an eye out for Alexis's new book, Time's Touchstone, The New Year in American Life. It's going to be published by the University of Texas Press and support from the National Endowment of Humanities.